know that just because it's what we typically see or it's the norm, quote unquote, that it's not a requirement, it's not a you have to do kind of thing. And I know anybody watching this is saying, well, duh, Morgan, if it's not a requirement, then you don't have to do it. But let me remind you, in the throes of working through a contract, the pressure is on. So if you get an appraisal back and there's appraisal issues or it's subject to, just because there are ways that it's typically handled, you really only have to stick to the way that the original contract was written about that particular thing. Just like I just dealt with this with a friend who lives in North Carolina that I'm helping with their agent, that I found out in North Carolina that the buyer is actually on paper per the contract responsible for anything to do with the appraisal. So if it comes back subject to, technically per the contract, the buyer is required to remedy any of the subject to items. Now, they can request that the seller do that, and it is customary that the seller does it because a buyer doesn't want to put money into a house that they don't own yet, which is understandable. But per the contract, it is not required for the seller to agree to that. And if you are in a position to where you can say, no, it's okay. If this deal falls out because they don't want to do the part that they agreed and signed to in the original contract, then you know what? If they want to get out of the contract, they can, and we'll just move on to the next person. If you're in a position to where you can do that and you feel comfortable and led to do that, then do it, because it is not a requirement unless it is in the contract. Now, here in Georgia, it's done a little bit differently as far as an appraisal goes. It's usually that, especially VA and FHA, there is a section that says the buyer or the seller has agreed to pay up to a certain dollar amount. If the repairs for the subject to of the appraisal are over that dollar amount, then we kind of come back to the drawing board and say, okay, who's going to pay the difference? And if everybody agrees to who's paying the difference, then we move forward. If not, then there's a way out and we can start over again with a different buyer. So it's a little bit different, but I found that very interesting because it was presented to my clients that this is typically what, buyers ask the sellers to do because they don't want to dump money into a house they don't own yet. And I get it. I do. But it doesn't mean that you have to do that. And I'm glad that their agent relayed that information to them as to what they generally see in the area, but then also told them, but you are right. This is what the contract reads. So if you're in a position that you don't want to offer that to them, then we don't have to, and you have options. So just keep that in mind, especially when you're talking to agents or interviewing agents or working with an agent. Make sure they're giving you all of this information, because it is not a requirement unless it's in the contract. Just because it's typical practice or something we see regularly doesn't make it fact and contractual.